On your Tuesday episode of Locked On Raptors, I'm back from vacation and have not read anything for like 3 weeks, and so we're catching up on the news that's surrounding your Toronto Raptors with the wonderful Katie Heindl. On today's show, we'll talk about Kevin Durant, of course. We'll talk about the Raptors maybe being a sleeping giant in the Eastern Conference per one Washington Post writer, and so much more all coming up on today's episode of Locked On Raptors. Thanks so much for being here for the return.
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey, what's going on? Welcome to episode number, God, good luck guessing this one, 1234, I don't know, of Locked On Raptors for Tuesday, August the 23rd. I'm your host, Sean Woodley of RaptorsHQ.com, still very much in vacation mode. You can find me on Twitter as always, at WoodleySean. You can find the show at Locked On Raptors. You can find the podcast for free on all your favorite podcast apps. You can go subscribe to, follow, rate, and review. It's very much appreciated when you do that. You can also go to YouTube and find the podcast for free in video form each and every day as well. Just hit the big red subscribe button over on YouTube and support the show. And as always, a big thank you for making us your first listen of the day. All right. 3 weeks have passed since last I recorded a fresh episode of this podcast. People really did not seem to like, by the way, the reflections on Raptors heartbreaks. No one likes to revisit bad feelings. I think people need to get back acquainted with their bad Raptors feelings in order to help them appreciate the good stuff that's happening now. But that's besides the point. We're back. We're talking about things that are fresh, much like Kevin Durant and his trade request and all of that stuff that we have been waiting for the entire offseason. We'll get into a few more news and notes items from the last couple of weeks. I've literally just pulled up Toronto Raptors and news on Google just to kind of give me a bit of a compass for how this episode is going to go. And joining me for today's show is, of course, Katie Heindl from Dime, from Basketball Feelings, from Spinsters sometimes, all over the place. Katie, what's up?
Hi, man. It's good to see you again.
It's good to see you too.
Good to chat. Last time I saw you, I was drinking way too many tequila shots at your celebrating your recent nuptials.
Yes, I think, did I have a tequila shot with you at one point?
Did. With Olivia and I coerced you, but it didn't take much coercion.
It did not. For the people out there, I was dealing with a horrible stomach bug on the day of my wedding, to the point that our photographer has offered to go through and touch up some of the pictures where I look like a ghost to
you were
just give
looking
me a little
a
bit tan, little color.
Gray.
Yeah. Yeah, I had waves throughout the day. Started off pretty well. Dinner time, really rough. Speech, I thought I was going to pass out during my speech. And then as the night progressed, as I decided to have a couple of drinky poos, I, settled into a pretty good zone. And then, of course, my fiance got the same bug the day before we left for our honeymoon. And I wasn't sure she was going to get on the plane. It was a great time. But it was wonderful. It was a fantastic, fantastic wedding. You and Vivek were both there. It was a Locked On Raptors hangout. It was very, very wonderful. So back now from my honeymoon, and we're going to dig into some Raptors news. Katie, Kevin Durant, this is just never going away, is it? I thought maybe 3 weeks, this will we're to go away. We'll never have to talk about this ever again. But no, that's not the case. Kevin Durant still not traded, still on the Nets. Since the last time we recorded a fresh podcast, Kevin Durant has given an ultimatum to the Nets, whether or not they're to either fire Sean Marks and Steve Nash or trade him. Before we get into that, what was your reaction to that news? Did that make you feel badly for Sean Marks and Steve Nash? Is that the just desserts that Sean Marks and Steve Nash deserve for letting Kyrie Irving be a part-time player and sort of bungling this whole situation? What was your response to that, Katie?
Well, I don't really feel bad for those guys ever. I didn't feel bad for them then. But I did it was more thinking, well, you can't be bad about something that you had a direct hand in making happen in terms of the Nash hiring, right? This is what happens, I think, when I equated it honestly to like, I'm all for player empowerment. I think it's great. But there's also, I think, a line when as players get more and more involved in front office stuff. I equated it to the times and I've had jobs and I've like said, I really want more responsibility. Like I want to be involved more, you know, whether that's like in your equivalent of that of a front office in a day-to-day job, like executive level stuff. And then, 6 months later, you're like, this kind of sucks. I don't really want this much responsibility. And I think there's something to be said for, superstar athletes who their job is primarily to play basketball. Definitely it is to exercise the things that they want, whether that's like contractually or the teams they want to play with and where they want to go. But I think when these things get a little bit conflated where they realize like, oh yeah, some of the front office stuff is pretty boring. And maybe I don't want to actually be entangled in it all the time. So that to me was the kind of comeuppance of Durant wanting to make decisions like that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
things are growing great
TBD.
with the Nets, I think, is the takeaway here. It's all going wonderfully. They're not screwed. Definitely not screwed. I guess. So we'll bring it then to the report from yesterday that the Memphis Grizzlies are now a team that is potentially kicking tires on Durant. The Raptors still in there as like one of the main potential teams, along with like the Celtics and the Heat. And I guess the Suns, even though the Suns keep on putting together like, here's Mikal Bridges and like some picks. Will that be enough, please, Brooklyn? Please. It's just like. We've been doing this
like
for
when
2
you're
months.
short
I'm
of change at like
mind.
the dep or something, and you're like empty your pockets. You're like, ooh, I have a nickel.
Yeah,
I have this
is it all right if I just pay a little less this time? I'll get you back next time.
I have a couple American pennies. I know we don't even have pennies here anymore. Will you take these?
Yeah. I'll write you an IOU for 14 cents if you really need me to. But yeah, the Grizzlies are in the conversation now, it seems. The Raptors still on the periphery. My assumption that the Raptors have just kind of like said, here's our sort of like third best offer, take it or leave it. We're not really pushing to make a move. I feel like that's probably still the case at this moment. I don't know. What's your read on this? And I guess to tie it back to the team that we talk about here on this podcast named after the Toronto Raptors, like, are you feeling any differently about the KD Raptors stuff now than we were maybe 3 weeks ago, the last time we dug into this, the last time it was kind of in the news as the Raptors were sort of circling this? I guess the Celtics stuff came out and that kind of quieted the Raptors stuff. Like, it hasn't felt like the Raptors have been like a serious contender for KD for quite some time now, but where are you at in sort of the Raptors of it all with KD?
I'm in the same place, honestly. But I think it's actually looking farther away for any team to land KD because what's become clear is the asking price is still so high. And a lot of the teams that want him and could use him definitely are almost like they're too good and they know they're too good that they're not trying to leverage their entire roster, right? Or like forfeit it in this case to get him. So that's where you see like even with the Grizzlies, it's like, yeah, we're not going to give up. Desmond Bane, right? Like, which is insane, which is amazing, which is like wonderful to me. Huge Desmond Bane supporter. Also, just like a huge supporter of like that kind of arc for a player because it's so rare and it just shows like, obviously like mirrored in a player like Fred VanVleet for the Raptors, but shows the kind of work from the ground up to just like make yourself invaluable to a team, right? And figure out exactly what they need and how you've got all those qualities. Which he does, but it's like, a year ago to be like, yeah, the Grizzlies wouldn't part with Desmond Bane for Kevin Durant. You like unheard of. But I think
it's insane for them to say that right now and actually think they're going to get Kevin Durant is the thing. Like they're not getting him. It's great. I think it's cool. Good for you. Like the Raptors doing the same thing with Scotty Barnes, who I think is decidedly higher upside player than Desmond Bane, but like
I don't know
if
this is not a knock Desmond Bane podcast.
It's not. Desmond Bane rocks. He should be a Toronto Raptor instead of Malachi Flynn. But like if the Grizzlies are actually professing to be like a serious, we want to get Kevin Durant team, and they're like, but we're not going to give you the best young player who's not Ja Morant that we have. They're not getting Kevin Durant. That's just kind of how it's probably going to go.
But that's where I think we're at, right? Like with the Durant stuff, it's just like the asking price is known to be as high as it is for like every single team that's like entered the conversation thus far.
Yeah.
And it's too many teams are too good, right? Like this is a good testament to kind of league-wide the shape of things. Like a lot of teams are like, no, they're not maybe championship contenders, but they're good enough to like get in the playoffs again, right? And like have a pretty deep run if they kind of adjust and tweak some things here or there. So why blow it all up for one guy who honestly now there's so many questions, and rightly so, like swirling around, like, okay, if he forces a trade out of Brooklyn, where he really wanted to be, what happens if, like, can he just turn around and do the same thing, on any other team? So there's like, there's some questions there. So I think the Raptors are in the same situation, and I think the most realistic outcome to me is Durant just stays in Brooklyn.
Yeah, I think at this point I'm kind of closing the book on the Raptors getting KD unless, some sort of strange movement of enormous tectonic plate proportions happens with the Nets. And like, if that happens, great. But, there's enough teams now that are kind of on the periphery that they could probably beat like the Gary Trent Jr., OG Anunoby, and all the picks offer. And so it just seems pretty unlikely. And at that point, like, I'm fine. Whatever. Like, the Raptors are going to be awesome next year and super fun. And potentially, per one Ben Golliver, who's a former guest of this podcast, who's a lovely fellow, very tall man, potentially a sleeping giant in the Eastern Conference. We'll talk about that. The PC wrote yesterday for the Washington Post in just a sec. But first, I want to tell you about our friends over at Rocket Money. If you keep on saying you need to make a budget but never do it, if somehow you keep missing credit card payments, if you're afraid to look at your bank statements, then it's time you take back control of your financial life. Meet Rocket Money, formerly Truebill, our favorite financial app. So why did Truebill change its name to Rocket Money? We'll tell you why that is. Truebill is now backed by Rocket Companies. It's grown from a bill management app into a full-on personal finance empowerment tool that helps over 3.4 million people with budgeting, lowering bills, canceling subscriptions, and more, saving each of their members on average $700 a year. And with all that growth comes the next evolution in Truebill's story, a new name. Bottom line, Rocket Money is everything you loved about Truebill, but with a fresh look and feel. Start canceling your unused subscriptions. Save money at rocketmortgage.com. It's Rocketmoney, that is, .com/LockedOnNBA. That's rocketmoney.com/LockedOnNBA, or download the app from the App Store or Google Play. Go check it out. All right, we continue on here with your first listen of the day, digging back into some Raptors news after many, many weeks away, looking at mountains and oceans and animals and whales. Whales are animals. I don't know why I'm drawing a line of delineation. Land animals, sea animals, both like animals that do both, like seals and sea lions, all of that stuff. It's been drawing all of my attention away. Both. Yeah, that's the scientific term for it. I'm reading a book right now about mammals, Katie. That's what they say in there is the scientific term. That guy does both. I don't know, Katie. Let's talk about Ben Golliver, shall we? Tall man, writes for the Washington Post these days. Of course, the author of Bubble Ball as well, fun book. And he wrote yesterday for the Washington Post about the Raptors being a sleeping giant in the Eastern Conference despite a quiet offseason, kind of pointing to, all the other teams made bigger, splashier moves. Yeah, the Celtics and Bucks are kind of the better teams right now. But you look at the Nets and the disarray they find themselves in. The Sixers aren't exactly young and are kind of always sort of hanging on the edge of a Joel Embiid injury or a James Harden forgetting how to play basketball situation. You've got the Heat, your beloved Miami Heat, Katie, who have lost your beloved PJ Tucker, who are very old, who are, going to have to play a lot of Tyler Hero, it seems, this year, which might not be the best thing in the world. And the Raptors are just kind of chilling, and they've had this offseason where they've not really done a whole lot, but it's kind of good that they haven't done a whole lot and speaks to the sort of health of the organization as it stands right now. So I ask you, Katie, are the Toronto Raptors a sleeping giant in the Eastern Conference? Are they already like awakening? Like, what? Like, do you agree with the assessment from our pal Ben Golliver over at the Post? That the Raptors are kind of in a perfect position to rise up the ranks of the Eastern Conference in the next year or two here.
I would say, okay, yes, in that you've got now the one season development and now off season development of Scotty Barnes.
Who, by the way, is roasting baristas and pro-ams like you would hope he would. But
Yes.
it's fun to watch him
Yes.
dunk on people who will never touch an NBA floor. That's fun.
Sad. And you've kind of had the gelling another season of Gary Trent Jr., Precious Achua exploded. So yes, there was something for that last season. We've obviously talked about it a ton at length. I think this kind of observation of the team being a sleeping giant has more to do. Sorry, there's a dog escape.
That's all right.
happening.
We love dogs on the pod.
There's
Is it
a
George
dog
or Captain? George,
Cap's
Captain, you
about
guys
to
doing
make
all
his
right?
escape, and George is come blasting through the door, so it might get louder. Anyway, because you've had, I think the moves that the team may still make, what we just mentioned about Kevin Durant, but probably won't, has done that thing where they optically push them to the attention of a lot of media members. Not Ben Golliver. I think he's definitely a person who is like usually aware of kind of
he's with it. Yeah, he's with it.
undertones of the league, but in a general sense, has probably put the Raptors back on a lot of people's radar of like where the Raptors were not before. So I think there's this sense of like, oh, this team thinks they don't need a player like Kevin Durant because they're already good enough or intact enough, right? And I think that goes along.
The dogs think they need Kevin Durant.
The dogs are in the dogs have escaped. Because I think that confidence, we talk about this a lot. Sometimes it is like presentation and how a team really puts themselves forward. And I think Masai is aware of that. I wrote about that when I way back now, it seems ages ago, when I wrote about the Raptors trying for Kevin Durant. It's like, it's good to be in these conversations as a GM and as a team, because it shows that you're in the mix, right? So I think
for sure.
To me, they're like whether the Giant is asleep or awake is the same as it was last season.
Yeah.
Like their presence is there, kind of looming, has been and is still. Remains to clarify like how that will look going into this season. They're definitely going to look way more intact, way more complete, better by all accounts. But to me, that's kind of like, that's how you and I talked about their trajectory all along from like last season into this. So maybe it's just, the wider world cluing in.
Yeah. I have felt as though this team is in line for a pretty impressive 22-23. Like I've been very bullish all offseason. Maybe it's just because it's the offseason and it's easy to kind of get bullish, but
it's a great time to be,
it's
unhinged.
the best time to be bullish. But, I just feel like everything we've seen suggests that some big things are coming. And maybe they don't go and win a title this coming season. I would be pretty shocked if they did, frankly. I'd be pretty shocked if they made it past the second round this coming season. But there was enough to really kind of latch onto last year, and not just like fake surface Kem Birch averaging 11 and 7 at the back part of the Tampa season stuff. Like very legitimate, like, oh, Precious Achua is like an otherworldly defender. Oh, Pascal Siakam has become an offensive engine who can drive a half-court offense for a team. Scotty Barnes is freaking Scotty Barnes. Like all of this stuff is very real stuff to latch onto to say, hey, like this stuff plus a little more continuity, internal growth going into next year. The team that just won 48 games and was like the second best team in the Eastern Conference after January 1st. There's probably going to be a pretty healthy amount of success on the floor for this team this coming season. And I agree. It's probably like, not to denigrate our pal Ben Golliver, because, you got to write national stuff and, it probably is always going to be a little bit later to the party than the local people covering the team, just the nature of how it works. But I don't know if it sort of says anything that Raptors fans didn't know necessarily, but it is nice that the Washington Post is doing Raptors propaganda. That's pretty swell.
There's just upsides to that.
Yeah. Let me ask you a question, Katie. So I think for the next few years, 3 teams are going to kind of be talked about in the same breath. And obviously the Raptors are a little bit ahead of both of these teams that I'm going to mention with them in terms of their curve based on how last season went. But because they all drafted in the top 4 of the 2021 draft, I think the Pistons, the Cavs, and the Raptors are all going to kind of be entwined. And like I could see a world in 2027, where the Raptors, Pistons, and Cavs are like the class of the Eastern Conference because they have Evan Mobley and Cade Cunningham and Scotty Barnes, and they're like the best players in the conference. Like that could totally be a thing that we're talking about. Obviously, not all of the best players in the league are going to come from the same draft, but it does seem like it was a pretty special draft. So maybe we can allow some, special occurrences for this, specific group of guys who went. Where do you kind of plot the Raptors in with those teams? Like, do you kind of view the Cavs and Pistons maybe a little bit behind the curve at the moment, but like, are they kind of on the same plane, sort of trajectory for you, or because of the Raptors' sort of built-in sort of infrastructure with guys like Siakam and Fred, like, are they always going to kind of be a bit of a cut above those teams who have the transcendent young guy or two, and the case of Garland Mobley or Cade Cunningham and Sadiq Bey or whatever, but don't have quite the sort of veteran core the Raptors have? Like, how do you sort of lump those teams in? Because I think you could probably say the Cavs and Pistons are also sleeping giants in some way. Just maybe they're going to be sleeping a little bit longer.
I think that's a fair assessment. I think the Raptors, yes, are ahead of that curve, because not necessarily in personnel. So, like, while they could still stand to maybe add somebody here or there, and they may yet. I think you've got the experience in your front office, and I think you've got the experience, like the holdover experience of players that were in the title run. Kind of lending to that, whereas the Cavs now and the Pistons don't have that. So I think that adds a lot. I think the Cavs are closer than the Pistons because the Cavs, I got a sense of what they had last season and how far it could get them. I think they'll get back there this year, but I also still think they've got some growing to do. The Pistons are probably
the growing is getting someone other than Lauri Markkanen to be their small forward, but
I believe in that experiment still. I think it can work. That they were not. He was not healthy for the beginning of the season. Jared Allen was not well. He was injured at the end of the season, so they didn't. That certainly hobbled them and did not help their continuous development. The Pistons are now in this very interesting stage of they have all the parts that they wanted. Not trying to make a car analogy here, but they lack the the tenured experience I talked about with the Raptors. They haven't gotten as close in a long time, right? So they didn't have that, which the Cavs did have last season. So they're in a very raw state, I would say. It's really interesting to me. That is the team that I'm probably the most excited to watch because it's going to be so raw and weird and explosive in probably the wrong way at times, but they've got the skill and the talent, and it's all very green and really young. So
it's very teal, Katie. It's teal now.
It's beautiful.
That was the big news of the last 3 weeks is they got the teal back.
Yeah, can't wait to get a full kit. Be a full kit wanker for that team. But they have Casey,
Which
right?
player will you get a jersey of, Katie?
That's tough. I made the horse sound. I don't know. Sadiq, probably.
It's pretty good. Getting Bay out of jersey is pretty solid. It's a good name.
Bay is pretty good. But you've got Casey, right? Who is probably one of the most storied, experienced coaches in the league. So I do think that's a fair assessment. They're not going to grow. It won't be a uniform growth by any means. I could also see something where for some fluky reason, one of those teams jumps ahead of the Raptors, or the Pistons jump ahead of the Cavs one season, and then they kind of even out the next season. But I do think these three, I think the Detroit Toronto rivalry, which started as a joke, is going to become more serious. Yeah. And it's not going away. And the same, honestly, with the Cavs, because we saw a little bit of that with just the Scotty Barnes windmill. And I just think the age, right, and the skill level of the players, they match up very well between Toronto and Cleveland. So I think those will become this very interesting, we should come up with a good name for it. Something like a triangle.
Yeah, the beat reporters Bane triangle, because we're gonna have all these reporters being like, I don't want to travel to Cleveland and Toronto all the
Like
time
the
for these
Bermuda Triangle,
national
but not
games.
Bermuda.
Yeah.
Like, is there like a regional, like, is there like a regional, either like a regionality slang or like kind of a regional like weather pattern could be a good one.
Oh yeah,
Putting this
yeah.
out, I'm putting this out to the listeners.
Yeah, comment below what you think the trio of Detroit, Cleveland, and Toronto should be referred to over the coming years. It'd be very, very appreciated because my brain's not firing at the level to think of something better than beat writers Bane triangle. But yeah, rivals. The Raptors need a good rival.
They do.
The whole NBA needs more good rivals.
Well,
I
that's
think.
why they started Rivals Week.
Yes. We'll talk about that. Let's talk about that coming up in just a second here. We'll finish up the show. Before we do that, however, reminder, go check out Locked On NBA every single day on your favorite podcast apps and on YouTube. It's free. They dig into all the big stories like Kevin Durant. Still a thing that's going on. I could have recorded this 3 weeks ago and it would have been the same. But, the Grizzlies talk and all that stuff will be on there. So go and check out Locked On NBA each and every day, wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. All right, Katie. Rivals Week. So you did a piece while I was away, digging into the NBA schedule, how it all comes together. I'm not going to lie to you; I have not read it yet.
Well, you should, because I interviewed one of the most delightful people, Jean Lee, who is one of the people at the NBA who puts the schedule together. A lot of how this stuff works, kind of behind the curtain look from a very patient man who answered some extremely I don't even want to say dumb questions, but like fully formed ideas I had in my head of how this thing got made that he was just like, that's crazy. That would never happen. But one thing we did talk about was Rivals Week, which is a new feature in the schedule this season. I thought of you right away because you're always trying to gamify basketball games further.
Yeah.
So I thought you'd like this.
Yeah, I've not. Again, look. One thing I'm very glad is that I missed schedule release week, where like Shams is reporting. Sources tell me team is going to play team 4 times this year on various dates. It's very bizarre. I hate it a lot. So glad I missed that. Can you fill me in on what Rivals Week is all about? I'm assuming they smack together some teams. Who do they have the Raptors playing on Rivals Week?
I don't even know that the Raptors. Oh no, the Raptors do have one. Oh shoot, who is it? Is it the Warriors? No, the Warriors are playing the Grizzlies. The Eastern and Western Conference teams are playing that were in the finals are playing each other.
Okay.
The Clippers and the Lakers are playing each other. The Nets and the Knicks.
The Raptors are playing the Warriors.
The Warriors. Okay, I was right.
All
so
right.
they're in there.
Finals rematch. Good times. That's
so. Fun. And then there's rivalries that have to do with family members who play on either team, which is funny to me. So some of these are like, quote, well-established rivalries, arguable. Some are born out of last season's playoffs, and some I think are
Minnesota. That's
the
a
league
good one.
Just saying these could be rivals.
Yeah, they got Bulls Hornets. I'm guessing because it's the balls and also the MJ situation. I guess. Yeah, good times. Yeah. That's the thing. This is really speaking to me. Speaking to how few rivals there actually are in the NBA, Katie. We need some better ones. But no, I actually like this feature. Just the lack of good rivalries is kind of what's inhibiting it a little bit. You got Nuggets Sixers, the most concocted rivalry of all time because their 2 players are very good in opposite conferences, and Sixers fans get really mad about that. That's fun. But either way, back to the concept of Rivals Week. Katie, the Raptors are playing the Warriors. If you could go in and do the schedule yourself, which of course you wouldn't because Jean Lee is the wizard behind it all.
Jean Lee made me feel a fool. I could never do the schedule myself. And that's fine. It's better in his hands.
Yeah. I think we could probably agree the Raptors and Warriors is probably not like the best rivalry the Raptors have right now, although they have played a lot of good games with them in recent years, so maybe it does qualify. But if you had the keys to the schedule just for a day in a hypothetical, Jean Lee has graciously handed it over to you. Who would you say is the Raptors' biggest rival right now, and who would you have them play during Rivals Week?
I mean, there's something to be said for the budding rivalry of the Sixers, I think. I do think the Celtics are always like a permanent rivalry.
It's very annoying, but
that seems pretty obvious to me.
Mm-hmm.
The Warriors are interesting because it's also like a lot of the players who were involved with that now don't play for the Raptors anymore. So
totally.
I don't think it's like there's like a holdover rivalry for a lot of the new players. I think they're like, what?
Yeah, Steph's still very annoyed by Fred VanVleet, I'm sure, and all the defense.
That's
he
like
plays
one
on
of
him.
the leftovers, obviously, like Pascal and OG, but otherwise, I think probably the Celtics. I just think of all of the playoff matchups that Toronto's had against that team. Most notably, I think in the bubble.
That was the only time they played the playoffs, right?
Yeah, to recreate, have like a stage setting, recreate the bubble.
Yeah, get rid of the people.
Get rid of
Bring
the
in
people.
the fake
Just have
crowd noise again.
Crazy crowd noises. The
Invite
fake
Taco
TV
Fall
screens.
back.
Yeah, like really set the stage.
Yeah.
And bring out those like deep. Again, not all the players were there, but like for the ones that were, really bring up those like deep feelings. No, I'd actually, now it sounds like I'm advocating for PTSD. So
Pascal Siakam had a pretty tough bubble series against the Celtics. We don't need to dredge that stuff up again. Although maybe that's like the perfect way for him to prove that he's overcome all that. And he goes into this bubble stage game, no fans, and just destroys Jaylen Brown and Marcus Smart at long last after getting punked by them for 7 straight games. It's tough. Like, there are not any really good rivals right now. Like, the Celtics are the closest thing. They've played them once in the playoffs. The Sixers, they've played them twice. But like obviously very different iterations of the team both times. The Siakam Embiid thing like does kind of give it some juice because there is like a camaraderie, but also like obviously some competitiveness between the two there. You get the whole
also only gets activated in the playoffs. You know what I mean? Like there's not a lot of animosity in the regular season between those.
Definitely not. It's just like Embiid just has a rough time against the Raptors all the time, basically. Like
so does everyone, though, right? Like this is something that you hear a lot. People like every team.
Punched my mic. Yeah,
that's okay. You were really emphatic. Every team has been.
Well, I hit it with the wedding ring, which is a new projectile.
Get used to that.
Throw at my mic. Yeah,
they're like, we hate playing Toronto. We hate it. Yeah. They're a very annoying team. So there's a lot of opportunities for rivalries, but they also seem like a nice enough team because no one actually hates them.
Yeah. I do wonder if the Pistons might become that team in short order, like the Dwayne Casey of it all. At some point, the Raptors actually have to beat the Pistons for it to be a rivalry, because right now they're just the Pistons' children. At some point, they might win a game against them and maybe sort of drudge up some good 401 feelings, perhaps. It's barren. Like, and like they keep on trying to force, like, is Celtics Sixers really a rivalry that people care about? Like, it's forced upon us all the time because they're two of the best teams in the East, but like I don't really care. Like, it seems like the Celtics usually win. It's not like they have that much trouble with the Sixers. I don't know. We need better rivalries is I think what we've landed on here. Maybe the Mavericks and the Suns can land on something good after what happened in the postseason. Either way,
like Katie, a deep Texas rivalry. I'd like one of those teams to, but
the Rockets are going to be good soon. The Rockets are going to be maybe. Yeah, we'll see. But like they do have an entire team full of Gary Trent Juniors, but I'm sure that'll work out just fine. Anyway, Katie, let's wrap it there. We've gone far too long for a podcast, which we didn't really have a whole lot to talk about when we started it up, but that's why we're pros. We just, we just string a yarn wonderfully. We'll be back again tomorrow with Big V, but Katie, in the meantime, do you have anything you would like to promote for the good people out there?
Well, I already promoted the great interview I did with Gene Lee. That's on Dime. I also wrote 2 much longer features for ASU's Global Sports Institute for their online magazine called Global Sports Matters. You can find them there. One is about diversity and coaching within the NBA, how the NBA has kind of managed to have like such good representation in its head coaches despite having no formalized rule. But on the flip side of that, this exodus of women they've had leaving the league for opportunities elsewhere. So I interviewed Wes Unseld Jr., the coach of the Wizards, for that, as well as Neil Ivey. She was an assistant with Memphis. She's now the head coach of Notre Dame's women's program, as well as some people in the NBA and the Coaches Association. I also wrote a profile and interviewed Caleb Canales, who was a longtime assistant coach in the league, most notably with the Blazers for 13 seasons, and then kind of hopped around and is now an assistant on the Mexico national team and left the league. So different stories of, how coaches navigate, well, not just coaches, people navigate in and out of the league and what the pathways are, and, how the league could actually stand to improve quite a lot.
In any of your conversations with these people, Katie, did you refer to them as coach like people do in scrums all the time? Hey, coach.
I don't. I'm trying to think. No, I didn't do that with any of them because it was all like, these were pretty intimate, like phone conversations, long conversations. Sure. I'm trying to think if I've ever done that with anyone. I think I did that with Dwayne Casey. He's just a person he is
like a man who projects, call me coach. It's fine. Yeah.
Yes. But no, I
can't do it with Nick Nurse. This does not work. It's like, I've seen you sing too many songs with the Arkells to be called something as dignified as coach as your.
And Casey was the first person who I've like felt compelled. It just like came out of my mouth. I didn't even think about it. And it's when I did, I was like, really? You said coach? But
I could see people in Dwayne Casey's life calling him coach is the thing. Like he's got that vibe. But anyway, we'll wrap it there. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll be back again tomorrow with Vivek Jacob. I believe we're going to try to talk about Pascal Siakam and just how darn good he is. It seems to go unappreciated at times. Not on this podcast, of course. We're pro Pascal all the time, and we will continue that pro Pascal agenda tomorrow, and we will figure out the rest of the week from there. It's the off season, baby. We're waiting for the world to drop news for us to react to, so that's what we're gonna do for the rest of the week. We're at 3 shows a week still until the middle of September as well, so you have that to look forward to. I don't know, wait for the return of 5 a week, or take a break in the off season and don't listen to 5 days of podcasts a week. You're not gonna defend me. I can't land this plane. We're done. We're going to talk tomorrow. Bye.